Welcome to Anews. I'm Omar Taslim and you're watching Türkiye Diplomacy. On today's episode, Anews editor Mustafa Kocakanar and political analyst Laurent Lecoeur will join me to discuss the future of humanitarian aid in the occupied Gaza Strip and President Trump's immigration crackdown. But before we begin today's discussions, let's take a look at this news report.
Swedish campaigner Greta Thunberg was deported from Israel on Tuesday, a day after the Israeli Navy prevented her and a group of fellow pro-Palestinian activists from sailing to Gaza. Speaking on arrival in Paris, Thunberg said she and her team had broken no laws and called for the immediate release of the activists still in Israel.
This is yet another international a violation of international rights, adding to the list of countless of such, especially towards Palestinians, that Israel are committing by blocking and preventing humanitarian aid from entering Gaza.
A day earlier, Israeli forces boarded the charity vessel, which was carrying a small cargo of aid, including rice and baby formula, and seeking to break Israel's naval blockade. All 12 people on board were seized. Meanwhile, in central Gaza on Tuesday, Israeli gunfire killed and wounded dozens of displaced Palestinians seeking aid, local health authorities said, as they approached the distribution site of a controversial US and Israeli-backed humanitarian group. Palestinians have described areas around the sites as chaotic and dangerous, with dozens of fatal shootings over the past week. Israel's aid blockade has gained international attention since it also cut off land access to the Strip in March. The United Nations says that move has driven Gazans to the brink of famine. The limited aid Israel allows in now is handed out by the group it backs. The British-flagged charity yacht was moored in the Israeli port of Ashdod on Tuesday. 3 others who'd been aboard also agreed to immediate repatriation.
If you see this video,
but 8 crew members are contesting the deportation order, according to Israeli rights group Adala, which advised them. They will be held in a detention centre ahead of a court hearing. It was not immediately clear when that would happen.
on our boat,
The activists said they wanted to raise international awareness about the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, which has been devastated by months of war. Israel dismissed the voyage as a pro-Hamas publicity stunt by celebrities.
because our governments are failing to step up.
Welcome back to the program. Anews editor Mustafa Kocakanar, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Omar.
Mustafa, let's start with the Madleen boat that was not allowed to dock in Gaza. Israel kidnapped the boat filled with activists. Now Greta Thunberg, the Swedish activist who was on the boat, has been sent back home, has been deported from Israel. She went to Paris. Now, Mustafa, what's the latest from this boat and how many activists are still in Israeli detention?
Omar, at the beginning of this week, Israeli security forces intercepted a Gaza-bound humanitarian aid ship in the international waters. And there were many important international figures and human rights activists, including Greta Thunberg, within this boat. And this boat was carrying humanitarian aid packages to the war-weary Palestinian people living in the Israeli-occupied Gaza Strip. And right now, many observers are saying that Israeli security forces kidnapped these humanitarian activists in the international waters. And I think it is clearly showing that Israel is violating the international law and international norms. And Israeli security forces, I think, are continuing to turn a blind eye to international criticism for the dire humanitarian situation in Gaza. And as you know, Israeli authorities are deporting these humanitarian activists to their homelands. And Greta Thunberg yesterday arrived in French capital, Paris, and she spoke about the dire humanitarian condition in Gaza and Israel's military actions in the region. And I think that the humanitarian rights activists are determined to continue to increase international awareness about the dire humanitarian conditions in the Palestinian territory, Gaza Strip. But as you know, there is also international criticism against Israel right now, because many Western leaders are heavily criticizing Israel's military actions in the Gaza Strip. And yesterday, some Western countries, including Canada, Norway, United Kingdom, and Australia, announced their common decision to impose sanctions on far-right Israeli ministers, and they are targeting Israel's finance minister and national security minister right now. And it is clearly showing that Israel is being diplomatically isolated from the international community over its ongoing military activities in Gaza.
Mustafa, also tell me about the Turkish foreign ministry's statement, because there was one Turkish citizen as well on the boat. What is his, what's his situation, and what has the Turkish foreign ministry said about the entire incident that has happened?
Omar, Türkiye and Ministry of Foreign Affairs are closely watching the developments in the region, and Turkish Foreign Ministry issued a written statement on Monday about Israel's activities in the international waters, and many analysts are accusing Israel right now accusing Israel of state piracy. And it is clearly showing that Israel is violating the international law in the international waters. And Türkiye has pledged to take necessary steps to release Turkish activists detained by the Israeli security forces. Turkey has been also calling for international reaction to Israel's military actions, both in the international waters and on the ground in the Gaza Strip. As you know, since the very beginning of the crisis in Gaza in 2023, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan have been in close contact with their counterparts from several countries to discuss what can be done in terms of reaching immediate ceasefire and a peace deal between Israel and Hamas. On the other hand, as you know, Turkey has been always calling for two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I think right now, international community, particularly Western countries, are taking Turkey's security demands into the consideration to bring long-standing peace and stability to the Middle East. As you know, some Western countries recognize the independence of the Palestinian states, and Turkey is also calling on the United States to hold its strong support for Israel's so-called national security in the region. And Turkey, I think, is expecting concrete steps from the United States to ensure peace and stability in the Middle East. Right now, I think that United States is the unique country in terms of being capable of convincing the Israeli decision makers to stop their military offensive in the region. I think if United States takes a step towards peace and stability in the Middle East, we will see a more prosperous region in the future.
Mustafa, you mentioned about the sanctions that were imposed by those 5 countries. So now I have a press statement from the State Department, so we're going to talk about that as well. The United States State Department says that the United States condemns the sanctions imposed by the governments of United Kingdom, Canada, Norway, New Zealand, and Australia on 2 sitting members of the Israeli cabinet. Now, you know, if you look at the language that's being used here, I'll get back to here. I'll read the statement. Hamas is a terrorist organization that committed unspeakable atrocities, continues to hold innocent civilians hostage, and prevents the people of Gaza from living in peace. What do you make of this statement? You know, I mean, if these things are being committed, these acts are being committed by the Israeli forces, but, you know, the United States, as usual, is saying that Hamas is the terrorist group here. So why isn't the United States labeling Israel a terrorist group or Israeli forces a terrorist group, Mustafa? Because, I mean, it's in front of the entire world how many people have been killed. Over 55,000 people have now been killed, and the majority of them are women and children. So why do you think the United States issues such statements? And you're saying that if the United States pursues peace, then there could be a solution to all these conflicts in the Middle East. But, if you look at the statement, I don't think the United States is going to be looking for peace.
Umar, United States is one of the most important supporters of Israel's ethnic cleansing policies in the Middle East. As you know, U.S. President Donald Trump and Secretary of State Marco Rubio have been always reaffirming United States' unwavering support for Israel's so-called national security demands in the Middle East. Yes, I said the United States is the unique country in terms of ending Israeli offensive in the region. But I don't think that the United States under the Trump administration will take a step towards peace and stability in the region, because many cabinet members within the Trump administration are strong supporters of Israel and Israel's Zionist agenda in the region. So we don't have to count on United States' role in the Middle East. There is also another option to reach peace and tranquility in the region. It is the option that unity and solidarity among the regional countries. I think Türkiye is trying to increase cooperation and collaboration among the countries in the Middle East. I mean Syria, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Egypt and Iran. Türkiye has been always calling for increased cooperation among these countries to deal with the security challenges in the region. On the other hand, I think Israel has a bigger geopolitical agenda in the Middle East. Israel is not only taking aim at the Palestinian territories, Israel also is taking aim at other countries' political sovereignty and territorial integrity. As you know, Israeli security forces have been targeting Syria's military infrastructure. They are also striking against Houthi rebels in Yemen. The Israeli decision makers are also lobbying for military operation and military intervention against Iran's nuclear capabilities and nuclear facilities. It is clearly showing that Israel has a bigger diplomatic agenda in the region, and Israeli decision makers, I think, desire to be only regional hegemon in the Middle East. I think that Turkey's diplomatic initiatives will yield positive results in terms of ensuring long-standing peace and stability to the Middle East. Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan has been in talk with his American counterpart Marco Rubio. They are discussing bilateral relationships between Turkey and the United States, exchanging views on the latest geopolitical developments in the Middle East. There will be a NATO summit this month in Netherlands, Hague, and I think that Turkey will bring a Gaza issue to the table. I hope Turkey will try to increase international awareness about the geopolitical situation in the region, because Turkish decision makers right now think that if there is something wrong in the Middle East, it will spread the cause to the other parts of the world, and it will pose a huge threat to international peace and security. I hope that Western countries within the North Atlantic Treaty Organization will take Turkey's demands into the consideration if they want to see long-standing peace and stability in the Middle East.
Mustafa, so what about a ceasefire? Because, the end result should be a ceasefire where both Israel and Hamas stop attacking each other, and Israel should end its genocide against the Palestinians in the occupied Gaza Strip. So, obviously Israel has been targeting civilians by saying that they're members of the Hamas terrorist group, according to them. So where's the ceasefire? Because, attacks are continuing between Israel and Yemen, Israel and Syria, and then there's Qatar as well, Egypt is there as well, Jordan's there. So, they have been negotiating, but there are no concrete results, because instead of, obtaining a ceasefire, now what they've done is they've started providing humanitarian aid through the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. And, 93% of the population right now in the occupied Gaza Strip faces extreme famine. So, where's the ceasefire? When can we see a ceasefire? Or are they even working towards a ceasefire?
Umar, Egypt and Qatar are hosting peace negotiations between Israel and the Palestinian resistance group Hamas. United States is also directly engaging in these peace negotiations. Turkish decision makers have been in contact with Hamas officials to discuss the possible terms for ceasefire or peace deal. But right now there are many complex issues between Israel and Palestinian group Hamas to deal with. There are different demands coming from both sides. Hamas is urging Israel to withdraw its all soldiers from the Gaza Strip. On the other hand, Israel is calling upon Hamas to dissolve itself and to go out Gaza Strip. I think these demands need to be reconciled by the international or regional stakeholders, and Egypt and Qatar are trying to play an important role as facilitator or mediator between two warring sides. Turkey is also contributing to peace negotiations between regional and international stakeholders. But as I said, there are many complex issues to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and we cannot expect any immediate ceasefire or cessation of the conflicts between two warring sides in the coming future. But I think that if regional stakeholders take a step in terms of coercive measures against Israel, maybe Israel will be compelled to halt its military offensive in the region. Otherwise, I think in these current geopolitical circumstances, Israel will continue to turn a blind eye to international criticism, and they will continue to take aim at countries' political sovereignty and territorial integrity in the Middle East.
Mustafa, like you said, there are many, disagreements between both of these groups, Hamas and the Israeli government. Now, obviously, Hamas wants Israeli forces to withdraw completely from the occupied Gaza Strip, and this is not what the Israeli government is going to do. What the Israeli government has proposed is that, the Arab countries, the regional Arab countries, could, take in the Palestinians. So at the end of the day, the Israeli government wants the Palestinians to leave the occupied Gaza Strip. And with what we've been seeing, Israel has not been allowing aid into the occupied Gaza Strip. Israel is not allowing journalists, and even if journalists are there, they're being killed. So, Mustafa, some experts have said that, at the end, the Palestinians will be forced to leave the occupied Gaza Strip. So do you think there is a possibility, or if, regional countries or neighboring countries would be willing to take Palestinians? Because I don't think that the Egyptian government or the Jordanian government wants to take Palestinians. What do you think about this?
Umar, right now there are more than 2 million Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip, and it is impossible for them to leave their homeland, because they are still trying to defend itself against Israeli atrocities. Yes, United States President Donald Trump has a plan for Gaza's future. Israeli security forces are also reiterating their strong support for Trump's so-called Gaza peace plan. But on the ground, I think it is not realistic to apply it. Because how can you evacuate 2 million Palestinians from the Gaza Strip? And as you also mentioned, that neighboring countries, Egypt and Jordan, will not be willing to accept Palestinians, because they think that it will also create more chaos for their political sovereignty and territorial integrity. I think the plans to be conducted by the United States and Israel will not be realistic on the ground.
Mustafa, thank you for that analysis. Now we'll take a look at this news report, and we'll be right back.
Canada, alongside Australia, New Zealand, Norway, and the United Kingdom, announced coordinated sanctions on Tuesday against two far-right Israeli cabinet ministers, accusing them of inciting violence against Palestinians in the occupied West Bank. The move, described as a significant diplomatic rebuke, immediately drew sharp criticism from the United States, which condemned the decision. The sanctions target the Israeli finance minister and national security minister, two high-profile members of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government known for their ultra-nationalist views and inflammatory rhetoric.
Well, these two individuals, Ben Gvir and Smotrich, have been inciting violence against Palestinian people for months and months and months. They have been encouraging egregious abuses of human rights. We have been raising this with the Israeli government, both privately and publicly.
The Allies emphasized that their sanctions, primarily asset freezes and travel bans, focus on ongoing unrest in the West Bank, but are inextricably linked to the humanitarian crisis unfolding in Gaza. They reiterated calls for an immediate ceasefire, the release of hostages, and unimpeded humanitarian access, including food and medical supplies. Tuesday's announcement marks the first time multiple Western democracies have imposed sanctions on senior Israeli ministers, signaling a growing willingness to challenge Israel's far-right leadership as peace prospects continue to dim.
We support a clear resolution in the Middle East. We have been outspoken about calling for, firstly, for a ceasefire, for the hostages to be released. We have made it clear we see that Hamas should have no role in the future of the region. We support Israel's right to live and to exist in secure borders, but we also support the legitimate aspirations of Palestinians.
Welcome back to the program. Let's take a look at the front page of Daily Sabah. Mustafa, now, as usual, Daily Sabah is focusing on many important stories. For example, what's happening in Gaza. There's Turkish politics as well. And, moreover, it's also about the economy. But let's take a look at the headline of Daily Sabah, Mustafa. Israel has killed another 18 Palestinians in the occupied Gaza Strip. I was mentioning earlier as well that, photojournalists are being killed, journalists are being killed, and that death toll is quickly reaching the 250 mark. And we were talking about Greta Thunberg as well. She's been deported from Israel. So Mustafa, tell us more about this. People were killed as well over the Eid al-Adha holiday. What's the latest, Mustafa?
Omar, as you know, at the end of May, United States and Israel launched so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. And this foundation were supposed to distribute humanitarian aid packages to the war-weary Palestinians. As you know, people living in the Gaza Strip are being starved to death by the Israeli security forces because Israel is not allowing the entry of humanitarian aid to the occupied Gaza Strip. And Israeli gunfire have been killing hundreds of Palestinians near a controversial US-backed aid site in the Gaza Strip. International criticism is also mounting on Israel to mitigate the humanitarian crisis and tragedy in the occupied Palestinian territory, Gaza Strip. There is also right now starvation crisis and famine in the Gaza Strip. People desperately need international help to feed themselves and their children. But on the other hand, Israeli security forces are continuing to take aim at Palestinian people waiting for the humanitarian aid packages in front of the controversial Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. I think that if Israel continues this type of action in the region, it will not help the Israeli decision makers secure their country's so-called national security, because we know that Israel is being diplomatically isolated from the international community. Right now, its allies within the Western world, they are also imposing sanctions on Israel. I hope that all the international and regional stakeholders will find a common way and common sense to mitigate the humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip and to convince the Israeli decision makers to halt their military offensive in the region.
Well, so of course, like you said, now, the perception is changing, because if you look at the latest polls from Europe, people are now supporting Palestinians. At the start of the war in October 2023, we were seeing that Europeans were in favor of Israel. They were saying that Hamas conducted a terrorist attack, and Israel should hold Hamas responsible for its activities. And when you talk about the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, when the war started in 2023 in October, during the first 3 months, Israel was asking Palestinians to evacuate to the southern areas, so from the north to the south. Now it's the same thing here as well, because these when the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is distributing aid, they're asking people to come to Rafah, which is another heavily hit area. It has been completely destroyed, and now what they do is they ask the Palestinians to come to that area, and then they open fire and then kill them, like you just explained. So it's the same pattern, Mustafa, that we've been seeing. But as you said, the support right now in the West, and also how we saw when the Madleen was attacked and when Israel detained those activists. So there was international condemnation as well. Mustafa, exactly. Thank you for that analysis. We'll definitely keep taking a look at the top headlines from Daily Sabah. Now, let's take a look at this news report, and we'll be right back.
Businesses in Los Angeles cleaned up on Tuesday after a night of unrest, as protests continued against President Donald Trump's deportation efforts in the city. On day 5 of the ongoing mass demonstrations, hundreds of U.S. Marines arrived in the Los Angeles area under orders from the president. Trump also activated 4,000 National Guard troops to quell protests, despite objections from California Governor Gavin Newsom that the deployments are politically motivated. Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass said federal intervention was not warranted.
This was not needed. The idea that the administration would usurp the authority of our state government, take it away from our governor, Gavin Newsom. The governor knows that if we put a request in for the National Guard and it went to him, he would comply. There was never an issue there because we were never thinking about calling upon the National Guard.
According to a senior Pentagon official, the troop deployments, including travel, housing, and food, is estimated to cost about $134 million. On Tuesday, Trump was asked how long he expected troops to remain in the area.
Until there's no danger. It's easy. Look, it's common sense. You ask me that question. When there's no danger, they'll leave.
Trump also left open the possibility of invoking the centuries-old Insurrection Act, which would allow the military to take part directly in civilian law enforcement.
If there's an insurrection, I would certainly invoke it. We'll see. But I can tell you last night was terrible. The night before that was terrible.
Meanwhile, congressional Democrats condemned the deployment of military forces in Los Angeles and expressed concern for other moves Trump could make in the face of ongoing protests. Here's Representative Jimmy Gomez of California.
This isn't leadership. It's a deliberate attempt by Trump to incite unrest, test the limits of executive power, and distract from the lawlessness of his administration.
On Monday, Governor Newsom filed a lawsuit asserting that Trump's activation of Guard troops without the governor's consent was illegal. The Guard deployment was the first time in decades that a president did so without a request from a sitting governor.
We do not want them here at all.
Back in the historic core district of Los Angeles, where several stores were damaged and looted overnight, Resident Daniel Fabiano told Reuters that the more troops Trump deploys, the worse the situation could become.
The federal government is what is causing this. This was not happening, when I woke up on Friday morning. This was a peaceful, quiet neighborhood. It is only getting worse the more the federal government is antagonizing and tweeting insults at us. The more troops they talk about deploying, it's only getting worse.
Welcome back to the program. Joining us now is political analyst, financial consultant, and the founder of the Macro Butler, Laurent Lecoq. Laurent, welcome to the program.
Good morning, Omar. It's my pleasure to be on your show again.
Nice to have you, Laurent. Laurent, let's talk about immigration. We've seen some, astonishing scenes from Los Angeles, the police, the National Guard. They've been attacking people who have been protesting for migrants. What's the latest? How are you analyzing whatever's been happening in Los Angeles?
Well, I think that it's almost 5 months that President Trump is back in the Oval Office. And if you remember, before Inauguration Day, there was a lot of comments that there would be some social unrest when Trump arrives back in the White House. So we had to wait for 5 months. But clearly what started like a protest against immigration, a tightening of the immigration rules in California and elsewhere in the US seems to become more a partisan kind of revolution, if I can say. We have started to see overnight all the Democrat governors supporting California's governor in his action, as well as kind of supporting the rioters. So, I mean, in fact, these events that are taking place in Los Angeles over the past few days could be the start of a much bigger trend across the US, where we see an increasing divide between the blue and the red states. So I'm quite worried that in fact this could be the first step of the disunion of the United States, which can happen over the next few years. I mean, we will have the midterm election in no less than 18 months. And then, of course, there's the 2028 election that a lot of people are already talking about while we are only, in June 2025.
Laurent, let's talk about the battle of the billionaires. Elon Musk versus Donald Trump. And you're the perfect person to ask this question to, because you've been following this for a very long time. Now, tell me, why are they fighting? Now, there is a divorce. We've seen it happening, and it has happened. So what are you making of it? Why did this fight start, and what position are both of these billionaires in right now?
Well, I also, again, I think that we need to look back at 1 year ago. In Butler, in July 2024, in fact, there was the first attempt of assassination of Donald Trump. And after that, we had all the tech guru with Elon Musk backing Donald Trump. So clearly, the re-election of Donald Trump was helped by this tech guru. And on top of this, in fact, what can be called a kind of the PayPal mafia also push J.D. Vance as the vice president of Donald Trump. So fast forward to last week, I think it's not about the big beautiful bill, and it's not about the cancellation of EV subsidies. It's more about how these tech gurus are able to influence the political agenda of the 47th US president. And it's likely that, in fact, what we are kind of seeing now is the first step of the divide between, I would say, the new Washington swamp and the Trump administration.
Laurent, tell me about Elon Musk. President Trump, a few days ago, he said that the U.S. government or the Trump administration is going to cancel his government contracts. Now, we all know he has a huge SpaceX contract. So how would that affect Elon Musk's finances?
Well, clearly, Elon Musk have always been between a rock and a hard place, right? Because Tesla depends highly of the Chinese market for its future growth. On the other hand, Elon Musk, other business like SpaceX in particular, are benefiting from U.S. government subsidies. So it has been put in a difficult position in the ongoing trade war with China, as well as the focus on American remanufacturing. The impact clearly could be that, in fact, especially for Tesla, the earnings are increasingly being politicized. So I think that for Elon Musk, the first impact will be even more pressure on earnings growth for Tesla. In terms of government subsidies, especially related to SpaceX, I personally think that, in fact, the American government is highly dependent on SpaceX for its special development. So, I mean, the NASA has been lagging behind SpaceX in terms of technology. So, I mean, one way or the other, in fact, the government and Elon Musk could find a deal related to SpaceX, because keeping SpaceX alive is kind of also vital for the US government if he wants to stay in the race of the conquest of space.
Laurent, we were talking about immigration a while ago, and we were seeing how, protests have erupted in Los Angeles. But Laurent, tell me, what would be the impact on the American economy if this tight immigration policy continues?
Well, clearly, you will see a tightening of the job market. There are a lot of jobs in the U.S. Which rely on immigration to be done. There are, in fact, a lot of small and medium enterprise in the U.S. Which rely on immigrants as well, on illegal immigrants to stay in business because, they cannot deal with the rising cost of wages. So, the impact of a tightening of the immigration policy could be twofold. There will be, first, an inflationary impact, especially in the service sector. I guess that you will see a rise in terms of service inflation over the next few months. And of course, this will come on top of the goods inflation that will come from the tariffs that are implemented since Liberation Day. And on the other hand, in fact, you will need to find new source of labor, which could be challenging in the next few months. So I think that all in all, the impact could be kind of stagflationary.
Laurent, just before I let you go, I want to ask you about your analysis on what's going to happen between the United States and China, especially when we talk about these trade tariffs. How are you analyzing this situation?
Well, I think that China and the U.S. are in a standstill situation in terms of their trade relationship. I think that, unfortunately, for the U.S., the trade war is kind of a war of attrition, and the time is on Beijing's side rather than on Washington's side. The U.S. need badly to increase its stockpile in rare earths for its defense and automotive sector. So we could see a deal, but I would think that it would be a temporary deal between China and the U.S. I don't think that we are at the end of the trade war. And in fact, the next step of the trade war is most likely a capital war. And what I mean by capital war is that China will continue to reduce its holding in U.S. treasuries. And this will pressure U.S. long-dated government bond yield on the upside. And of course, this comes at a time when the U.S. government still needs to refinance around $6 trillion by the end of the year. So I think that, in fact, in this game between China and the US. All the cards are in the hands of China, and not many cards are in the hand of the US. And that's what I feel that, in fact, President Trump is trying to divert the attention from the trade war to another topic. So, of course, over the past few days, the focus of the media are on this social unrest in California. And I guess that over the next few days, President Trump, who is like most of the time a magician, he needs to focus the attention to other problem than the real problem of American people. Could once again come back with a geopolitical agenda. And here I think that, unfortunately for the Middle East, the question around Iran is not solved yet. And there also, I don't think that the US holds many cards. In fact, it seems that we are going into a confrontation between Iran and the US. And I think that rather than being a direct confrontation, in fact, the US could use its ally in the region, i.e. Israel, to do the job in Iran. But of course, all these are pure geopolitical speculation. But for financial markets, if we see an escalation in the conflict in the Middle East, and especially in Iran, this would mean much higher oil price. And of course, on the flip of this card is that a much higher oil price would mean that the US will inevitably move into a stagflation, let's say, by the fourth quarter of this year. So it's a difficult game to play for Donald Trump because, as I said, we are around 18 months ahead of the midterm election. And for sure, if we see a spike in the oil price, and especially the gasoline price, and we see a much higher borrowing cost in terms of mortgage rates, this will not piss a lot of the MAGA supporters in November 2026.
Laurent, thank you for that analysis. It was a pleasure having you on the program.
Thank you very much.
Anews editor Mustafa Kojakanar, thank you to you as well.
You're welcome.
That brings us to the end of our program. Thanks for joining us. Bye for now.